right, so we're having a technical difficulty. Can you hear me now? Any updates on audio? Sorry to force everybody to watch this if you're not hearing anything. Can you hear me at all? Check 1, 2, check. Welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Can you hear anything? Let's see, getting a text. Aha, I'm hearing that maybe we're back. Let me see. Aha, whatever I did worked. So we're going to have no visuals this morning because I had to close out of my browser. So everything we talk about is going to be just me staring at you. Welcome to Frankly Speaking. Sorry about the audio situation. That's a new one. It was showing everything coming crystal clear, but you were not hearing me. So we're going to start right from the beginning, and we don't have to catch up on breaks for quite some time. Thank you, everybody, by the way. When you have a technical difficulty, you see something with a tech issue, please always contact me. There's my information. Because I cannot hear the audio. I'm hearing through the mic, of course, but I don't know what's actually being broadcast. So at any time, and I thank you. We had a lot of people reach out, and thank you for being patient and sticking with us. I really appreciate it. All right, we are back, and I've heard from numerous people. Audio and video working. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Frank Acom. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. I mentioned earlier, and you could not hear me, so I'm going to redo it. If you want to reflect on where you were 22 years ago today, please reach out with your story. I'd love to read them on the air. I'll give you my story quickly. I was in high school. The next day I was supposed to start an internship at a radio station. Because that was the day after. I had basically half an afternoon to do nothing. So obviously sat in the library watching the live TV coverage as events unfolded. So that's a look at where I was 22 years ago today. Where were you? Also, I want to bring up this story. And I'm sorry I'm not going to have anything up on the screen because I restarted the computer. So you're not going to be able to see the article itself. But coming from the New York Post, last week we had Sheriff Schramm on, and we've talked with other sheriffs, other politicians about this issue, which is Albany tying the hands of police and really coddling criminals. And this is out of New York City, but it's exactly what we were speaking to last week, which is this idea that younger people are being recruited into gangs or breaking the law because they can, because there's no repercussion. It was another boneheaded decision coming out of Albany to, again, unfortunately, create more victims. Out of New York City, child thieves keep targeting bars and leaving owners, quote, overwhelmed with thefts. Listen to this. The owner of an Upper West Side bar that's been terrorized by a gang of thieving children said he was threatened by one of the youngsters, as yet another Manhattan business owner came forward Sunday as a victim of what they're calling a kiddie crime wave. Now, I'm not going to go through this gentleman's story about being threatened by young people. They're saying as young as 10 years old are doing this. It's like gangs of young people. When the pub owner warned the child that he would call the police, the boy allegedly replied, quote, "The police can't arrest me. I'm just a kid." And that's exactly what's happening. That's why gangs are recruiting young people, because they know they cannot get in trouble because of the new laws on the books in New York. The chubby-cheeked crooks, it says here, who appears to be no older than 10 years old, have been targeting businesses in Manhattan and Brooklyn for months, graduating from taking money in unattended bags to stealing cash from open safes. And that's what workers and owners are telling the New York Post. It is unbelievable. Now, this out of New York City, but expect similar to happen here in upstate New York as young people learn about the fact that they will not have any type of repercussion if they break the law. Another wrong-headed decision coming from Albany. Now, I do want to talk about some of September 11th tributes that we may get to later on. Also, President Biden was on that trip. A lot of people criticizing him because he he is going to, remember September 11th in Alaska. There's a lot of criticism there. And of course, he had kind of a disastrous, I don't know if you saw a press conference. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit as well. I'm just trying to play catch up. And again, thank you to everybody for letting me know about the audio issue because I am not always, I can't hear the live broadcast. Otherwise, you'd be getting feedback. So now we've got a lot of time to kill because I went to so many breaks. And so I'm just trying to get my bearings here. A story or a topic that we've discussed almost since day one on this program is unfortunately Americans losing faith in the country, losing faith in their faith. And there's a new book out specifically about this. Gerald Baker writes at the New York Post. And again, I'm sorry I don't have anything up on the screen because I had to restart my computer during that little hiatus, during that commercial. But it says Congress, the presidency, the FBI, the judiciary, the media, colleges, universities, big businesses, churches, scientists, technology companies, labor unions, public health leaders. What do these institutions all have in common? The answer? Americans don't trust them anymore. In the last 30 years, we have witnessed something unprecedented and perilous to the very survival of American democracy, a collapse in public trust in the nation's leaders and institutions. If there's one phenomenon that captures that better than anything else, what's going wrong in America in the last few years is this, quote, we live in a culture of mistrust. All the major institutions that have defined and shaped American democracy have witnessed a dramatic decline in the faith and credit Americans place in them in the space of one generation. Isn't any wonder, given how they have behaved, these institutions behave. And that's a very good point. And that's one of the things that people discuss so often when it comes to former President Trump. One of the reasons why he was so popular is his combative nature towards some of these institutions. Now, this book is by Gerald Baker, and it's called American Breakdown: How Americans Lost Trust in Their Leaders and Institutions and How to Rebuild Confidence. He said he looked in detail at the collapse in public faith and confidence in our leaders in the last few decades, how it happened, and how we can start to restore trust. So again, that book, American Breakdown. In the latest survey, I mentioned this again early on the program, it was conducted in July by Gallup. It found that across 9 key institutions, the average proportion of Americans who have said they had, quote, a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in them was 26%. That was the lowest number ever recorded in the 1970s when Gallup started measuring the number, and it was close to 50%. So this is all very fascinating. You can find it for yourself at the New York Post. But he wraps up his piece by saying America hasn't failed. It has been failed by these so-called leaders who control so much of our culture and so many of our institutions. The rest of us have lost faith in them. We need to begin the work of transforming these institutions so that once again, to pursue the highest American values and start the long process of rebuilding trust. And it is going to be a long process. We can't give up. We can't just shrug our shoulders and say nothing we can do about it. And when we talked about it, get active in the community. Maybe join a faith-based organization or a charitable organization. That's why so often on this program we talk about community and really point to community leaders, community events. Speaking of one, there is the 9/11 tribute, which will be held at the First Responders Park over in Elmira, the First Responders Memorial Park, I believe it's called, in Irwin. That's today at 11. That's a part of the community. We can never forget what happened 22 years ago. I know that almost sounds cliche at this point, but it's true. And I've got a couple pieces here that hopefully I'll be able to get to before we run out of time. And I know we've got a lot of... So we've got a lot of time to kill because I had to take so many breaks in order to get the audio back up. So I do appreciate that. So let's talk about Biden for just a moment. Did you see many are calling it rambling press conference in Vietnam? It was brought to a sudden end on Sunday night with his mic and cutting out and jazz music filling the air. Almost like he went too long at an award ceremony. That's almost what it would have felt like. Biden was mid-flow and answering questions from journalists when he was interrupted and forced to shuffle away and head backstage. We talked about stability. We talked about the third world. The Southern Hemisphere has access to change. It wasn't confrontational at all. Biden rambled on, and his handlers obviously saw a major issue there, had to cut him off. Suddenly, the booming voice of his press secretary could be heard butting in. Thank you, everyone. This ends the press conference. Thanks, everyone. He had some very strange comments. Did you see? He's made this reference before, and I'm not even really sure what it's from, but he said, and the Indian looks at John Wayne. This is a quote from President Biden. And the Indian looks at John Wayne and points to the Union soldier and says, he's a lying, dog-faced pony soldier. Remember when he used that, I want to say, during a debate? And there's a lot of criticism at the time as well, but I'll continue. Well, there's a lot of lying, dog-faced pony soldiers out there about global warming. But not anymore. All of a sudden, they're all realizing it's a problem, he said, whispering into the mic. Then at the end, as he was kind of wrapping up, he said, I'm just following my orders here, as he was cut off. The President of the United States, I'm just following my orders here. I don't know about you, but I'm going to bed. That's an exact quote from the end of that press conference with President Biden. Every reporter on the list also, and it's all kind of fascinating, every reporter on the list was a woman, something that wasn't lost on a journalist from the independent U.S.-backed Voice of America, saying, thank you, Mr. President. I hope you didn't think that calling only on women would get you softballs tonight, she told him. And he said, oh, I know better than that. If you sent me a softball, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'd probably strike out or even worse. But then he wrapped up by again saying, I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to bed. Now, there is quite a bit of criticism of the president for, again, being in Alaska on September 11th. We may get to that. But even during CNN, who tries to do everything they can to even twist those disastrous poll numbers that they found, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. But also on this trip, even they had to admit in the takeaways from his G20 summit and Vietnam trip, awkward moment at press conference was one of the takeaways. This coming from CNN, someone that wants to support the president at all costs. White House press secretary on Sunday abruptly ended a news conference with Biden, at one point taking a microphone and announcing the event was concluded, even as the president was still answering questions from reporters in the room. As the president was responding to shouting questions from the press secretary took to the microphone to announce, thank you, everybody. This ends the press conference. Biden had at this point taken the 5 questions from reporters in the room that he said he would. Yes, as we know with Biden, handpicked who will be asking questions. That's nothing new. I'm sure you've heard that at this point. I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I'm going to bed. That's the takeaway that so many people are mentioning, that and the lying, dog-faced pony soldier comment. Boy, and he tries to force that in there, doesn't he? Really making no sense. Okay, so if you're just joining us, thank you, by the way. This is Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank Aiken. We're broadcasting live from the Hesselson's studio. We've got a little time to kill because I had to take breaks right away because we were having audio issues. But that seems to be fixed. And again, I cannot thank you enough for everybody who reached out and said there was audio problems. So please feel free to weigh in. I'd love to hear from you on all of the comments and all of the discussions that we're having this morning. I'm just trying to get my sea legs back now that I have 1, 2, 3. So I do have to take a break here in just a little bit, but that's good. Glad we're back. I'm glad the audio's back. So we talked about last week the real concern over Biden's poll numbers. Van Jones saying, no, this is something that we have to be concerned about. We can't just ignore it. And a lot of people have said, if it ends up being Trump, Biden has no problem. But now there's the third party issue, not just with Cornel West, but that no labels group. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But Democrats are expressing their frustration with these poll numbers. Senate Democrats say President Biden's poll numbers are concerning and frustrating. This coming from The Hill and Alexander Bolt. But they are doubtful any message shift by the White House will change how voters view him before the 2024 election. And we know they're putting on I didn't see it yesterday, but a mad dash of ads. What was it, 25 million or something crazy like that, trying to convince you that the economy is actually good. And we see article after article that's saying, hey, never mind. how you're feeling when you go to the grocery store, you go to the pump. The economy is actually really, really good. It goes back to what we were talking about with the young people robbing in New York City. Never mind how bad and disastrous bail reform is and that you're scared and to leave your homes. You fear for the safety of your family. Never mind any of those things. Never mind if you've actually been a victim of this crime, because we're going to tell you everything's okay. Never mind what you're experiencing. So you've got to be concerned about those poll numbers. You just do, said Senator Jon Tester. There's plenty of time to get them back up. Whether he can or not, I just don't know. But you've got to be concerned. Now, one Democrat senator who asked to speak on anonymity said voters at home expressed deep apathy about Biden's prospective reelection during constituent meetings over the August recess. The senator said the polling data reflects all the miscellaneous encounters I'm having all the time. There's just no enthusiasm. It does pretty much come down to, well, he's done a pretty good job, but he's just too old. Well, there wasn't any excitement. If you really think about it, there wasn't even excitement back the last go around. I mean, he campaigned. I know this is cliche at this point, but he campaigned from his basement, did very few events. It's kind of par for the course. So what they're banking on, and we hear it time and time again, is that they just believe that he can beat Trump, that Trump's more disliked. And you're starting to see very similar language that you heard back when Trump was facing Hillary. Well, he's got no chance. This is the best thing that could happen to the Democrat parties. He gets the nomination. You know, that kind of talk. But instead, Democrat lawmakers who expect a tough fight to keep their Senate majority are counting on Republicans nominating, here we go, former President Trump for the top of their ticket, whom they view as a candidate Biden has a good chance of beating next year, despite his weak poll numbers. A CNN poll of 1,500 adults, we mentioned this last week, shows Biden's job approval rating standing at 39%, and 67% of Democrat and Democrat-leaning voters say that the Democrat Party should nominate someone other than Biden for president next year. The poll showed 58% of Americans have an unfavorable impression of Biden, and nearly 3/4 of respondents say they are concerned about his age. And, you know, you see that press conference in Vietnam, and that's not something that is going to help his image. So I would imagine Democrats are very concerned over this. I think, and maybe this was to Van Jones's point last week, but more specifically, I think a lot of Democrats are saying, well, we're just not going to worry about it. Because if he faces Trump, we feel that it's easy for him to beat. If you want to go that way, I mean, to me, if I were a Democrat, that would make me very concerned. And I think that's what Van Jones was saying last week, which is we have to realize that this is a major problem. John Hickenlooper, senator, of course, said he's frustrated that Biden's poll numbers are so bad, and here we go, despite the strength of the economy and the president's legislative accomplishments, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. Do you feel that that was successful, though? Has that been helpful? No. It was just more spending and leading to more inflation, which gave Medicare broad authority to negotiate lower prescription drug prices and provided $370 billion to combat climate change. It's frustrating, said Hickenlooper, citing a disconnect between voters' view of the economy and inflation in the latest data. They think inflation is still running away. Inflation has come from 9% to 3%, now 3.5%. It's, relatively speaking, under control. Now we're not at 2%, but we're darn close, he said. What do you think? You have to continue to try and find fresh ways to talk about this. I think we have to find some fresh ways of letting people know that the reality of what we're seeing is little short of a miracle. Wow. So frustration with the polling numbers, and that has led to the discussion about a third-party candidate, which is not good for a Biden campaign, especially at Cornel West. He's on the green side, so you know that would take away some of the votes from Biden. Also, there's this no labels idea that we talked about before. We're going to get to that when we come back from break. I got to make sure that we're all caught up. We did have a little bit of a technical issue at the beginning of the program, so thank you to everyone who stayed with us. And I know this was a longer segment because we didn't have quite as many breaks because I used them up at the beginning, but I do have to now play a little bit of catch up. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hasselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Today there is no M.A. Neal Financial Services section of the program. I wanted to take this time on September 11th to reflect, have some time together, you and I, and also talk about the issues of the day and play just a little bit of catch up because we had a lot of stories we were not able to get to last week. And I know we did talk about Biden's poll numbers, but not as extensively as I hoped to. So before that, I received this message, and thank you for reaching out. Today at 11 o'clock this morning, at the Tri-County First Responders Honor Park, which is located between Forest Drive and South Hamilton Street in Painted Post, there will be an event, again, 11 o'clock this morning, to thank the first responders for their service. So thank you for passing that along. I had mentioned it earlier in the program. I did not have all the specifics. I couldn't remember the exact name of the honor park. So the Tri-County First Responders Honor Park, located between Forest Drive and South Hamilton and Painted Post. That's at 11 o'clock this morning. I hope to see everyone there. Also, I received a message. Biden could have just sat back and rode the Trump train. Instead, he derailed it. I think that means economically speaking. There was a lot of talks of that. But he did change a lot of policies day one. For instance, we're no longer energy independent, those type of things. Okay, so thank you. Continue to reach out if you have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms. If you'd like to say where you were 22 years ago today. So Biden's poll numbers are striking this fear of a third-party candidate. This coming from Hannah Trudeau, and again, I apologize that I have nothing up on the screen this morning because I had to restart my computer very quickly if you're just joining us to get that audio problem fixed. So we're not going to have the website up like we normally do, but this is coming from The Hill as well. We've had quite a few stories this morning from The Hill. New polls show that President Biden is tied or trailing several GOP presidential candidates, and deep concerns among voters over his age are stoking Democrat angst about a third-party candidate, quote-unquote, stealing a victory in 2024. Yes, if you look at those poll numbers, I mean, nearly any Republican candidate is defeating Biden. Nearly. I want to say DeSantis was tied with him. Trump beating him by, I want to say, 1 point in this poll, again from CNN. But so the new polling makes people uneasy because you have liberal candidate Cornel West, who's running as a Green Party candidate, and then you have this centrist, if you will, or moderate contender, which could be Joe Manchin. Some have speculated it could be him, with the no labels. Could also be a spoiler for Biden. Groups on the left are among those expressing discontent, arguing that the only candidates who will have a chance to actually win the White House are Biden and the eventual Republican nominee. The 2024 presidential election is a binary choice between Joe Biden and the MAGA GOP nominee, said Ronna Epting from Move On. She pointed her criticism squarely at no labels. I would think they'd be more upset with Cornel West. I didn't think, well, who knows? No labels, if you don't know what that is, it would be a unity ticket. So a Democrat and a Republican as president and vice president, someone more maybe moderate like a Joe Manchin. But they're completely laser-like focused on this no labels idea, which has seen a bunch of attacks recently from all corners of the party in recent weeks. That's why we are so alarmed that despite this urgent and unique moment of peril for our democracy, and I know I mentioned this on the program a while back, but that's going to be the constant talking point, that Trump or whoever the Republican is a threat to democracy. I'll give you an idea of what, remember Rob Reiner, Meathead from All in the Family? He had a thought on how to save democracy. And you're never going to believe it's how to fix an election. But anyway, I'll continue. No labels has no theory to win and no infrastructure or plausible case to get to 270 electoral votes. So you're starting to see the long knives come out over that. But I do think Cornel West could be a really, I would think, to Democrats, a very scary option because you can see him taking it. Green Party always takes away some votes from Democrats, but he's actually a well-known name, unlike Jill Stein the last go-around. So that's going to be interesting. So Andrew Sullivan, well, no, because I mentioned it, and before we go to break, Rob Reiner, so Meathead. He said, hard reality. He X'd out, or however they're saying that, what it used to be Twitter. Hard reality. For our democracy to survive, remember, that's going to be a constant talking point for the next year and a half. Threat to democracy, save democracy. But for our democracy to survive, two things have to happen. Donald Trump needs to be convicted for January 6th, and there can be no third-party candidate. So Glenn Greenwald weighed in on this, saying, I love when Democrats take a break from insisting that they are defending democracy to actually explain a bit of what they mean by democracy, from trying to imprison their political adversaries to suing to strike them from the ballot to censoring the internet. And Federalists' Molly Hemingway saying similar, this is the equivalent of canceling the 2024 election. Removing from the ballot the candidate most likely to defeat the ruling regime is the equivalent of canceling 2024's elections. A horrific attack on democracy. Everyone who cares about the country should loudly condemn. Just something to pass along to you, both sides of the coin there. So it is time, according to Andrew Sullivan, who's no fan of Trump, let me tell you. He says, I voted for Biden over Trump, and I would do so again if that's the matchup. But he says it's time for Biden to leave the stage. He talked about the ceremony last week where Biden just in the middle of nowhere just got up and moseyed away. The same happened when he was giving an interview to MSNBC. So we're going to talk about this as Andrew Sullivan gives examples, but I do have to take another break. So stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, please stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. We did have some technical issues at the very beginning of the program, so I thank you for sticking with us. We have a lot of catch-up to play here. So let's get right back to it. So Andrew Sullivan says every time you see Biden walk, he seems well in his 80s. He's slow, careful, stilted. Every time you hear him speak, he's also just a little off. Eyes now barely visible. In the ancient, Botoxed, fillered face, words often slurred, a ghostly white mane peeking over his collar in the back, occasionally rallying to the point, or strangely, loudly whispering. As Joe Klein said last week, he seemed so old. His eyes were slits. He turned the pages of his very prepared remarks haltingly. He slurred his words slightly. His physical condition overwhelmed the message. So this is the man the Democrat Party says will be fully able to function as president for 5 more years. And that was a point that Van Jones made last week, and I thought it was kind of startling when you think about that. 5 more years. You forget that there's a whole year left. So he'll be age 86. No one rooted in human reality believes it or should believe it, that he has 5 more years. But again, Andrew Sullivan says, listen, Trump is almost as old as Biden, but he has the energy and stamina and obsessiveness of the truly mentally ill. So you can see that Sullivan is no fan of Trump. I started to read his interview this week with Hugh Hewitt, and yes, it was a festival of delusion and lies and occasional decent points. But what struck me also was the zeal, untempered by time, the persistent, angry passion. And that's what he's talking about with Trump. But up against Biden, he seems like raw energy. So this is a very interesting piece. We don't have time to get to all of it. But he quotes a few people who, and I think they're, what do I care? But I think they're doing a disservice if they just shrug their shoulders at the polls and people's concerns about Biden's age because they think that Trump is so easily beatable. They thought that, of course, when he was facing Hillary Clinton. David Frum says, those of us looking at these numbers and checking our own gut are, of course, concerned. In the words of Jim Messina, I'm not going to use the term he actually used, Obama's campaign manager in 2012. This is the same Messina, mind you, who in early 2016 proclaimed, I wake up every morning and drop to my knees and pray, please God, give me Donald Trump as the GOP nominee. David Frum predicts a Biden blowout. He reassured me of a Hillary blowout a week before the election in 2016. We're all fallible, but I think that they were wrong about Trump's strength then and wrong about him now. So again, Andrew Sullivan pointing out the fact that I voted for Biden. This is what Sullivan said. If he's up against Trump, I'll do it again. But now here's what this all boils down to and why I bring this up, and then we've got to take a short break. But who else, the Democrats say? I don't know. But that's what primaries are for. Harris is an obvious non-starter, which goes a long way to explain why we're stuck where we are. But there's no reason she shouldn't throw her hat into the ring. RFK Jr. is another non-starter. But look how far he's gone despite being completely bonkers. Even Marianne Williamson has polled as high as 9%. There are plenty of popular Democrat governors. You know, we mentioned Newsom. He goes on and names more. Come to mind, Senators Warren, Klobuchar, or Booker could run again, as could Buttigieg. Others will emerge, yes. There's a risk in Biden pulling an LBJ, but there's a risk with him in staying in one place as all the energy propels Trump back to power. Very fascinating piece. Again, this is Andrew Sullivan. You can find it at his website. But as he wraps up by saying, there is no shame, Mr. President, in acknowledging human limits. Your stamina for an 80-year-old is admirable, but it cannot prevent human decline, and the chance of a sudden change for the worse in your health is very real. There's a dignified way out and forward. Please take it. You've served your country well, but we need to turn the page, and there could be no worse legacy than handing the country back to the monster you rescued us from. So that's Andrew Sullivan. We got to take another short break. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, please stay with us. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, a couple of comments that we received. By the way, I'll put my contact information up while we do that. It's still a great show in the spirit of coming back from a problem. I appreciate that. Thank you. We did have a little technical issues this morning, but the show is still arguably the best show on television. Also, anything's arguable. I wanted to remind you, because I only have a couple times to mention this, but today at 11 o'clock this morning at the Tri-County First Responders Honor Park, which is located between Forest Drive and South Hamilton in Painted Post, there's going to be an event to thank the first responders for their service. So do not miss that. That's 11 o'clock this morning. I hope to see everyone there. Okay. You can always send along information like that if you have any event that you'd like me to mention. I'd love to promote it here on the show. We do have to take another break here in just a moment, but a new poll that came out, from CBS News and YouGov, nearly 60% of Americans disapprove of the performance Vice President Kamala Harris has put forth, while just 18% say she makes them, quote, think better of the Biden administration. Wow. The survey published Sunday shows that just 41% of Americans approve of Harris's performance as vice president. And that's why Andrew Sullivan said in that piece, that's a non-starter. And that's why has a lot of people concerned about Biden's age. They don't like the thought that she is next in line. She's done a pretty dismal, and we've heard reports on this, and the polls show it as vice president, dismal job. So just interesting. I wanted to pass that along to you. I've got to run through a bunch of things here. Interesting, also another interesting piece, that President Biden keeps Hunter Biden close despite all this political pushback. That's a piece at dnyuz.com. Let's take another break. We're going to run through, because this is our last break, going to run through all the issues that we haven't had a chance to mention, so it's going to be fast-paced. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox. And we are back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio as we wrap things up. There's quite a few amazing pieces reflecting on 22 years ago today. Nicole Parker of Fox News says, on 9/11, I saw pure evil up close as people jumped to their deaths, but I also saw the best of humanity. During this sacred commemoration, may we take a moment to reflect on the victims and heroes of September 11th and those who gave everything in the aftermath. May we each consider what sacrifice we can make in order to give back and serve our great nation. I am blessed and proud to be an American. United we stand. In God we trust. We must never forget 9/11. Jack Carr saying similar, having a piece at Fox News. As he said, and we just don't have time to get to all of it, but it's a really good piece you can find at Fox News. But he says, there is hope in the lessons of the past and in the lessons of the U.S. experience in Afghanistan. But as it was passed to me in the SEAL teams, hope is not a course of action. Our future depends on dusting off the history books, heeding their lessons, and then applying those lessons going forward as wisdom. We owe those who sacrificed their lives on 9/11 and in the Afghan dirt nothing less. Jack Carr is a New York Times best-selling author, and he was a former Navy SEAL, task unit commander, and sniper with deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, Andrea Pfizer at New York Post says 22 years of never forget, and Biden is spending 9/11 in Alaska. There is a lot of criticism over this. Our 80-year-old president and First Lady Jill Biden are in Alaska. Yes, Biden was in India this week for the G20 conference, but he couldn't arrange his schedule to make it back for a 9/11 ceremony, instead doing a flyby on the remotest part of U.S. soil. It may have been 22 years, but New Yorkers, remember, now and forever, it is vitally important that we never forget, lest it happen again. And the New York Post editorial board having something similar, saying, as 9/11 becomes history, never forget takes on a new meaning. Well, I'm not going to go, we just don't have time for all of it, but time heals. It's unbearable to live with horror constantly in the forefront of your mind. But as 9/11 becomes history, heed the words. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And the New York Daily News has a similar piece. It was only yesterday, it's titled. And it's amazing, right? It was only yesterday, but it was so long ago. Hey, one last thing, completely unrelated. The Buffalo News has a very good opinion piece. If you have the chance, you can find it at Empire Report. But another voice. It's high time to reset New York's incredibly bungled cannabis industry. This is actually coming from the Board of the Cannabis. That must be the name of it. While the legal cannabis industry in New York languishes, the illicit market thrives. Those of us following the legal rules and regulations were promised much better. We were told that if we just adhere to the rules, the market would reward our hard work. Instead, many of us who invested much of our life savings into the vision promised are now being bled dry through inconsistent regulations and a lack of enforcement against the illicit market. So they basically came up with 3 actions. First, address the registered organizations. I'm not going to go through them. Second, amend the regulations now to equally limit the size of cultivation facilities. Third, call a special session of the legislature to codify the conditional adult use retail dispensary program into law. All right, we are out of time for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you to everybody who lasted through the little audio issue. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody reach out to let me know. Also, I hope to see you today in Irwin at 11 o'clock for that memorial service. If you do, come over and say hi. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow morning starting at 7 for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV, Big Fox. I look forward to it already.